We are live from the 2017 Champion Bruce Institute. I will be your moderator, Michael Norton. With me, I have our pro team, Cornelia Fraser and Kevin Hautigan, and our con team, Miranda, Nutt, and Sarah Branse. We will be debating the topic, Resolve, the deployment of anti-missile systems is in South Korea's best interest. Between speeches, I will briefly be stepping in and providing some commentary, things to look at and things to look for. With that being said, let's start the debate.
We affirm resolve, deployment of anti-missile systems is in South Korea's best interests. Our sole contention is the bomb. According to NBC News 2017, a senior intelligence official said from a U.S. assessment that North Korea has 8 to 10 nuclear weapons. While sitting on this powerful technology, the North Korean regime is being weakened for two key reasons. First, China is beginning to cut off the North Korean economy. Foreign Policy Magazine 2017, 5 days ago explains that China's largest supplier of fuel to North Korea has halted sales amid growing pressure on Pyongyang. Furthermore, governmental sanctions have been put in place. The New York Times writes, China said it was suspending all imports of coal from North Korea as part of its effort to enact UN Security Council sanctions amid stopping the country's nuclear weapons. Fox Business 2017 explains the importance of this fact, noting North Korea is completely reliant on China for trade. Second, Kim Jong-un is losing control of his people. The Express 2016 writes, increasing numbers of desperate North Koreans are fleeing the country, with officials blaming Kim Jong-un's reign of terror and tough international relations. This allows Al Jazeera 2017 support. The elites are turning their backs on the supreme leader, and the traditional structures of the North Korean systems are crumbling. Overall, countries facing such immense pressure become irrational in order to portray dominance. The Washington Times 2016 supports this, noting that Kim Jong-un may lash out after convincing himself he has no other choice to survive but attacking the U.S. alliance preemptively, thus throwing the Northeast Asia into chaos. CNN 2015 elaborates, the number and intensity of the North Korean provocations has tended to increase after events such as power struggle, the demise of the supreme leader, and the public naming of the successor. This internal pressure in North Korea has caused Kim Jong-un to move more on the offensive and flex its military capabilities. In 2017, so far, the CNN 2017 finds that North Korea has fired 12 missiles during 9 tests compared to only 10 holistically in 2016. This is highly problematic because they further that the country's closest neighbors, such as North Korea, are vulnerable to attacks from their existing arsenal. THAAD protects South Korea in 3 ways. First, shooting down a bomb. Newman of Wired 2017 explains a need for more anti-missile systems, writing that THAADs are exactly the kind of thing that you need for regional security. Business Insider 2016 furthers that THAAD, the most advanced missile system on the planet, can hunt and blast incoming missiles right out of the sky with a 100% success rate. Second, deterring a bomb. North Korea would not waste precious nuclear weapons when they know they can be blasted out of the sky. The University of Utah explains that results demonstrate that national missile defense generally enhances the stability of deterrence. Therefore, missiles won't be sent in the first place. Third, waiting out Kim Jong-un. National Interest 2016 explains that South Korea's current missile defense capabilities, the Patriot PAC-2, can reach up to an altitude of 40 kilometers, while THAAD can reach up to around 150 kilometers. This helps them wait out the North Korean regime. They further that it buys South Korea a few more years. This is important because it allows South Korea to outlast the irrationally violent North Korean regime. CNN explains that a defector from North Korea who worked among the elites in the city explained that Kim Jong-un's days are numbered. Overall, the impact is the mass loss of life. A missile strike could kill thousands, which is why the Express 2017 writes that based on the 2013 nuclear capabilities of North Korea, a bomb discharged above soil could kill an estimated 77,670 people instantly. As this sparks an all-out war, more will suffer, and for all these reasons, we are very proud to affirm.
Sarah and I negate resolves. Deployment of anti-missile systems is in South Korea's best interest. Anti-missile systems unnecessarily impede South Korea's geopolitical progress in 3 instances. The first is China. Adam Taylor of the Washington Post writes in March of 2017 that China aggressively opposes the THAAD system because the system's long-range radar can track Chinese missiles, giving the U.S. the ability to spy on them. Already, China has retaliated. Martinez of ABC News reports in May of 2017 that China is imposing economic sanctions on major South Korean businesses to show its disapproval of the system's deployment. Moreover, Modi of CNBC writes in April that Beijing has begun impeding tourist travel to South Korea. This is problematic, as he furthers that this travel ban could reduce the number of Chinese visitors to South Korea by 70%, resulting in $1 billion in lost tourism revenue. This leads Julie Ren of Branse News to conclude that China's recent travel ban can shave at least 20% off of Korea's GDP growth this year. However, the economic implications of that extend far into the future. Adam Taylor cited previously furthers that China is South Korea's largest trading partner, and the value of its exports to the country were $142 billion, more than twice the value of its exports to the United States. Diplomacy with China is essential for South Korea's economic growth and stability. Second is Russia. Russian and South Korean cooperation in future years is becoming of paramount importance for South Korea's strategic goals. Anthony Rinna of North Korea News in 2017 explains, Seoul is becoming increasingly sidelined in multilateral discussions, feeling that it must pursue a course in North Korean policy that is more independent of the United States. At present, their Russian relationship is based largely on economics, yet Russia and South Korea both share the same visions of a peaceful and nuclear-free North Korea, making Russia a valuable partner by giving South Korea more flexibility in maneuvering between China and the United States in the future. Ensuring that South Korea has more control makes it easier for them to advocate for their best interests. However, deploying anti-missile systems unnecessarily strains this critical alliance. Dennis Pinchuk of Reuters in 2017 reports that Moscow is alarmed by the deployment of anti-missile systems to South Korea, arguing that this destroys the strategic balance in the region. Stefan Gady of The Diplomat in 2017 contextualizes the extent to which Russia has been threatened, writing that Russia has built up troops in disputed waters in response to missile defense systems deployed to South Korea. Anti-missile systems are not worth risking South Korea's most strategic geopolitical alliance and the adverse consequences of a militarized Moscow. Third is North Korea. The South Korean regime is making progress towards peace with North Korea. Jennifer Williams of Vox magazine explains in May of 2017 that the new president wants to improve relations with North Korea, including funneling money to Kim Jong-un's regime, but that stands in stark contrast to the Trump administration's far more aggressive stance. This becomes especially important as Michelle Kellerman of NPR in 2017 reports that North Korea has come to the table willing to talk about giving up its nuclear weapons. But deploying anti-missile systems as a larger part of U.S. strategy in the region incentivizes the cycle of North Korean militarization. As Al Jazeera in 2017 explains, after THAAD's deployment, tensions soared, furthering that the North will continue bolstering its preemptive nuclear attack capabilities unless Washington scraps these policies in South Korea. Michelle Kellerman, cited above, explains the North's rationale, arguing that their reason for having nuclear weapons is that they believe this is their only pathway to secure the ongoing existence of their regime. Threatening them with further militarization miles from their border only confirms that belief and leads to a perpetual cycle of nuclear tests and field tactics to ensure international legitimacy, to ensure that South Korea is able to be diplomatically, economically, and militarily stable in the long term. Any country's best interest, you negate.
So just some brief things to look for in those previous two speeches. You'll notice a difference in style as well as a difference in strategy. Whereas one team prefers a narrative that primarily focuses on one piece of offense, being security of the region, the other tends to focus on several different pieces of offense and does not use as centralized of a narrative. So those are just some things to look at in terms of differences in strategy. There are also a variety of differences in perception in terms of how each speaker tends to read their case. So in terms of things to look for in the crossfire, look at how each team decides to compare their strategy and what they use to try to set up early weighing in this very beginning crossfire in the round.
All right, you have the first question.
Yes. Okay. So has North Korea say they would do negotiations in the past?
Yes.
And so why is it different now if they've never actually fulfilled their negotiations?
So I would argue the primary difference is the new South Korean regime that is now more open to negotiating with North Korea, but more importantly, the Trump administration, for the first time in a lot of American regimes, is also willing to negotiate. But looking to your second warrant real quick about a deterrent, have THAAD missiles been deployed in South Korea?
Yes.
So if it was that effective of a deterrent, why do we see in that 2017 we saw a huge spike in missile strikes, as you read at the top of your case?
2 reasons. One, we tell you it's not being an effective deterrent because it's actually not active in the first place. But secondarily,
so are
this
they
is really
deployed or not?
problematic. Hold on. This is really problematic because all your impacts, China, Russia, and your third one about North Korea, you yourself just conceded that that is already in the status quo, right? In North Korea.
Our evidence
South
in
Korea.
case
So
says that,
how
right?
comes-
That's why.
How comes your impact isn't materializing? So why don't we see the impact
So-
of North Korea negotiating happening?
The reason why we don't see the impact of North Korea negotiating is because our entire third warrant is that you force North Korea out of away from the negotiation table because they believe their only option now is to retaliate. That's literally our entire third warrant.
So that's a really big problem, right? So how can we trust North Korea's word if they failed negotiations 50 times in the past?
Because of what I just told you. The 2 regimes that are most important in those negotiations, the United States and South Korea, are fundamentally different.
But if you
But
don't
let's get
change
back to
the
my
reason
original
why North
question.
Korea is going and leaving the bargaining chip and the negotiating table in the first place, you don't prove.
I think this is really important to clarify. Let's go back to my original question. If it is that effective of a deterrent, why have we seen strikes spike?
So what I said before, the deterrent is not basically it being in the region. The deterrent is
So the
based on it
deterrent
being
is not it
active.
being deployed?
So let me
What's
ask
the
you a
difference
question.
between deployment
Let
and
me ask you a follow-up question to that. So say I have a gun, right? Is it more effective if I point the gun at someone or just have it concealed in my pocket?
What does the resolution ask?
So that leads me to my question, right? It's more effective as a deterrent if it's seen actually happening actively in the status quo.
But that's not what the
That's why we
resolution
tell you
asks,
that
right?
The deployment, is deployment active or is it more resolution?
Well, when I asked you, the very first question I asked was, are they deployed? And you said yes.
No.
So which is it?
Sorry, okay. Just to clarify that is in the region but it's not deployed yet unless you affirm the resolution. Now can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay, so let's go to your first contention about Chinese spying, right?
Mhm.
So what impact has this happened since you said the sanctions have been in early May? Like what impact have you seen on South Korea right now?
So the impacts are that we see that on-net tourism has decreased to an amount that Modi would conclude that it would cause a
Yeah, I'm
severe
asking like a
economic detriment.
quantifiable.
So clearly, if it happened in May, right, we can't project their entire, like, we can't just tell you how much GDP has been lost since May, but they project that it would be a total of 20% loss in GDP growth.
Is everyone ready? Beginning with an overview at the top of my opponent's case. In today's round, we must be preferring impacts that are directly quantified and related to the South Korean people. Cornelia and I tell you in today's round that if there is even a risk of a bomb detonating in Seoul, it will kill 72,000 people instantly. The things talked about in their case are a lot less significant as they are simply nebulous impacts like tension and general GDP loss. They never tell you how it directly affects the South Korean people. Their first argument is about Chinese backlash to the anti-missile defense system known as THAAD. They say, with the Martinez evidence at the top of the argument, that economic sanctions were put on South Korea for the missile system. Keep in mind, this was before the missile system was even deployed in the first place, so it isn't a unique argument. Whether or not we deploy this THAAD anti-missile defense system, you will see these sanctions. The second problem comes with their Modi evidence, where they say a travel ban exists that is really dangerous and can lower travel to South Korea from China about 70%. CNN in 2017 explains that in the past year, South Korea has seen an increase in tourism from every country in the world except for 2. This is really important because it shows they can adapt even if Chinese tourists begin to stop going to the country. But third, they give you this impact from the REN evidence that says there will be a 20% decrease in the growth of the GDP. Keep in mind, this is only 0.5% of the South Korean GDP total. They don't actually tell you how much this is going to impact the South Korean people. But fourth, they give you this evidence from Taylor that says there can be future sanctions put on South Korea. The problem is that's very unlikely because the Wall Street Journal in 2016 explains that China recently has been suffering because of a decrease in global demand. Therefore, they need more places to export their goods, and given the fact that South Korea is their third largest trading partner, they are not going to be able to shut out South Korea in the long run. Then, on their second argument, they talk about Russia and how they are an important partner to South Korea. A couple of problems. First, they try and tell you that deploying the THAAD anti-missile system is going to be dangerous and ruin this partnership. The problem is, Panda, the diplomat in 2017, explains that Russian diplomats have said the reason they oppose the THAAD system is because they feel it can fire missiles offensively, despite all evidence to the contrary. What this means is that A, this is probably a non-unique argument, and that Russia wanted to get involved in the region on the side of China in either world, they would have found an excuse or a scapegoat anyway, or B, if they really do believe that THAAD can fire missiles offensively, once it is implemented, they will see that this is not the case and stop meddling in the region. The second problem with the argument is that it isn't unique. The Getty evidence they read you at the bottom tells you that Russia is increasing troops in disputed waters, but Singe of National Interest explains that Russia has been doing combat drills with China in these disputed waters since the summer of 2016. It clearly has nothing to do with the THAAD missile system. The third problem is they never actually show you any materialization of this impact. So what if Russia is doing combat drills in this area? They don't actually tell you how that affects the South Korean people. Then, on their third argument, they talk about North Korea. There are a few problems. The first one is they say South Korea is so ready to work with North Korea and we're going to ruin all of that progress. They don't actually show you this is true anymore because in the past few days, North Korea has fired an ICBM missile and South Korea and the United States have actually taken place with using provocative military drills, showing that South Korea is willing to use hard power. But second of all, even if this diplomacy would happen, it would not be the right policy. Note the Sunshine Policy, which happened in the early 2000s when South Korea tried to work with North Korea diplomatically. That is what led to North Korea getting so much leverage and creating nuclear weapons in the first place. But third, they only tell you all this progress is going to fall apart because North Korea views THAAD as an offensive weapon. Remember, clearly they're going to find any excuse to become belligerent because they are falling apart. All facts point to the contrary because all that THAAD does is shoot down missiles that are coming towards South Korea. It has nothing to do with offensive tactics. Thank you.
Orange ready? Starting at the top of their case, they give you two warrants about why North Korea is currently weakening, and the first of which is that China is cutting off their coal trade. Understand that even if this argument is true, there's a minimal impact to North Korea. The New York Times, their own evidence suggests that China's trade with North Korea grew 37% this year, even as it stopped buying North Korean coal, meaning that it's not a sign why North Korea is destabilizing or weakening. But their second argument is about losing control. Understand they never give you any direct impact why this is destabilizing the country and why North Korea has to flex their power to compensate. We provide you two reasons why North Korea would never actually attack even if you buy the two warrants they give. The first of which comes from the Huffington Post. They explain that North Korea has proposed negotiations over a formal peace treaty with several countries, including South Korea. These negotiations were halted with the initiation of THAAD. The Al Jazeera evidence that we provide at the end of our first contention shows that North Korea will bolster its preemptive nuclear attack capabilities unless the U.S. scraps its hostile policies. Meaning that deploying THAAD will always result in North Korea stepping up its game and making it harder for future military endeavors in the long run. You can cross-apply our case where we show that the more the U.S. adds a militaristic presence in that region, the more likely North Korea will retaliate. But second, even if my opponents are correct and North Korea is becoming more of a legitimate threat in the status quo, there's a very big difference between an actual attack and missile tests. Lendon of CNN notes that North Korea is very fearful of an American invasion, so it's unlikely that they would preemptively attack. In fact, the only reason why North Korea is testing their missiles now is to gain leverage. Feifeld of the Washington Post explains that North Korea's missile testing is designed to get them a better bargaining position before economic sanctions force them to return to the negotiating table. Cross-apply our Kelman evidence from case that shows that North Korea has come to the table willing to talk about giving up its nuclear weapons. But now let's go into their specific warrants about that, and the first of which is shooting down the bomb. Understand that that isn't as effective as they make it out to be. The Hill explains that that has blind spots that North Korea could easily exploit and circumvent. That's why their empirics about a 100% success rate is completely unrealistic. The Hill furthers that these tests were highly scripted to maximize the system's chance of success. However, when accounting for more realistic conditions, George Lewis of MIT finds that most of the interceptions would have failed to stop North Korea's attacking warheads. Talmadge of the Seattle Times furthers that on net, the THAAD system is not a reliable defense, which only perpetuates a false sense of security for the South Korean people. This is worse than even having a system because the people will be less prepared in the event of an actual attack. To win this argument, make them prove to you that A, these systems are actually effective, and B, their benefits compensate for the long-term false sense of security.
But next, their second argument is about deterring the bomb. Understand that this technology of THAAD objectively exists not to help South Korea, but for the US to protect their own interests. According to Su, a professor of politics at international affairs, he writes, this system is designed to attack high-range missiles, but most North Korean missiles that would be used against South Korea are short-range missiles. He furthers that the THAAD system would not protect Seoul, where half of South Korea resides. The US plans to deploy it in the southern half of the country, only to protect the US forces stationed there. Therefore, it's disingenuous for my opponents to claim that they save civilians when in reality, the technology is not designed to save the civilians. That's why they can't access their impact of 77,000 people, because that's only looking at Seoul, and Seoul wouldn't even be covered by THAAD. But lastly, on their argument about waiting out Kim Jong-un, I have 3 responses. First, they need to win their first 2 warrants to access this. At best, if North Korea collapses and attacks South Korea, that is still ineffective. Second, a world where North Korea collapses and is forced to negotiate is preferable to one in which they are collapsing and South Korea instigates the conflict. And third, they're conceding this is a short-term impact. In the long term, it's still better that South Korea is diplomatically and economically stable. We urge you to negate. Are you ready for crossfire?
Alright, so let's talk about the Huffington Post evidence you read, which is the first reason you say North Korea will never attack South Korea. And the reasoning that's behind this evidence is that North Korea is currently sitting down with negotiations, or was sitting down with negotiations before THAAD,
Yeah,
correct?
so it was previously.
Okay.
Before THAAD was initiated in South Korea, North Korea was very receptive to diplomatic talks.
Sure. So what do you mean by receptive? Haven't we tried to
They
sit down with
proposed-
North Korea in the past?
Yeah, in the past, we've tried to sit down with North Korea. In this past year, the roles have been reversed. North Korea has actively proposed to other countries that they want to be more diplomatic
Sure.
and they want better relations.
So
And one
the
specific,
thing
this is really important, but
Sure.
one specific country was South Korea. North Korea and South Korea had diplomatic talks. However, that was halted with the initiation of
that's
that.
fine. What I don't understand though is how this is any different from the last time North Korea embraced South Korea. That's what I talk about in my rebuttal with the Sunshine Policy. In fact, you could look to Arms Control in 2017, who actually lists out the dozens of times North Korea and South Korea have sat down together and talked about trying to find some sort of middle ground and then failed. North Korea is constantly power hungry, and I don't understand what's changed.
Let's say your first contention is true, that North Korea is currently weakening.
Yeah.
You yourself give a reason why North Korea is more receptive right now to diplomatic
No, that's a
talks.
fundamental. That's fundamentally
Let me
misunderstanding.
explain. If they're really weak right now, as you say, then there's either 2 avenues they can go. They can either attack or they
Sure.
can be diplomatic.
Sarah, I understand that. The problem is you're fundamentally misunderstanding how dictators act. And Cornelia and I are the only ones that give you any sort of empirical analysis that looks at the way the North Korean government acts. In fact, the CNA evidence we read you in our case tells you that as North Korea has been squeezed, as North Korea has begun to crumble, empirically they've become more belligerent, not more willing to sit down at the negotiation table. But
That's
do you
only
mind if
looking-
we move to the
Can I
next
ask you a
argument?
question now?
Sure.
So specifically on your argument about success rate and your first 2 warrants about how THAAD can be effective.
Yeah.
How does your 100% study prove that if it's only looking at field situations and not an actual attack?
Sure, I'm glad you brought that up because I think there's a misunderstanding between our 2 sides on how THAAD operates, right? THAAD is a type of missile defense system, right?
Yes.
Okay, that being said, it's not a singular type of missile defense system. There are 2 things to consider. One, THAAD shoots down high-range missiles, so it is complemented by systems like Aegis and the Patriot PAC-2 and 3 missile systems that shoot down low-range missiles. Secondly,
Wait.
THAAD is not a, let me explain and then you can jump in. THAAD is not a unit all by itself. There are multiple THAAD units that will be deployed to cover different blind spots. One missile defense system will not cover all of South
But
Korea,
Kevin,
of course.
The problem
You
is
need
that
multiple.
you're making this analysis without any scientific backing. You can't just
That's not
assume
true.
that multiple THAAD units can work together. A THAAD
I'm
is
not
a
assuming
singular
anything.
missile, and it does have blind
I'm not
spots.
assuming anything.
You
In
have
fact,
to
when
provide evidence.
Sure,
that
let
you
me-
can combine multiple.
Yeah, if you let me jump in, I'll explain it. The United States actually, when they were deploying THAAD, wanted to deploy 6 separate units. In fact, they only deployed 2.
Gotcha.
An interesting developing in the round is the different strategies that we saw in the rebuttal. So one team instead prefers to use an overview that emphasizes tangible impacts before dumping on the opponent's case, whereas the other team prefers to simply leap into the flow and make as many responses as possible. Now, one thing to look for moving forward is the different approaches in terms of what impacts are relevant and what each team chooses to go for. Some things to look for: what actually is a THAAD system and what is it capable of doing, and what impacts are the most important ones, specifically to the best interests of South Korea.
Is it all ready? Kevin? My opponent in her rebuttal says that North Korea won't attack for two reasons. First, she says from the Huffington Post that North Korea is pushing for negotiations. But this is really important in today's round because we tell you that North Korea is an irrational actor. They've done this before. We've had negotiations from 1953. Why this is important? Because Kevin tells you in his rebuttal that the Sunshine Policy in which North Korea pushed for negotiations was just a curtain for them to increase their nuclear arsenal. So if anything, you're giving them the capability to come back from the brink of nothing. We tell you, since they're on the brink of collapse, all rationale goes out the window. That's why the war to why North Korea is going to attack South Korea is for one big reason, that Al Jazeera finds that the elites are turning away from Kim Jong-un, and the Washington Times finds that power is one of his biggest goals, and if he loses that, he will eventually lash out and attack his neighbors. This is why CNN finds that it will increase the intensity when there's a power struggle evident. So even if there's a risk of a North Korean attack, that's enough for us to affirm. Their only response to our solvency is they say from the Hill that there are blind spots, and from MIT that say that North Korean missiles will be stopped. But remember, her evidence is outdated. It's from 2005. We tell you since 2005 we had innovations to the THAAD system. One, but secondarily, THAAD is just a type of anti-missile systems. That's why she doesn't respond to our evidence that says in the status quo we have other anti-missile systems such as the Patriot Pact-2 that can take out the short-range North Korean missiles. This is really key because we tell you from the Business Insider, because that has a 100% success rate. This is really important because we have the risk of saving people. They never give you a quantifiable impact of how South Korean lives are going to be affected when you negate. But we tell you when you affirm, you have the risk of protecting the South Korean people, which is 25 million people that we must protect. But secondarily, we outweigh, because one, our evidence are quantifiable. Secondarily, we outweigh a probability. We tell you there will be a North Korean attack. They say they don't give any solvency to taking out North Korea, and because lives are the most important, because South Korean people is in the best interest, you affirm.
All right, running back. That was 25 additional seconds used. Is anybody not ready? There are two fundamental barriers to my opponents accessing offense in today's round. First, they have to prove that North Korea is a legitimate threat. But secondly, they have to prove that THAAD curbs that legitimate threat. So first, a couple of defense on the threat issue. She totally concedes the Fiefeld analysis coming out of Sarah's rebuttal that tells you that there's a fundamental difference between missile tests, which North Korea has been doing, and an actual attack. But secondly, that's when you vote on the Linton evidence, who tells you that the reason why there wouldn't be an actual attack is because North Korea is too afraid of the United States to threaten their entire regime by launching that offensive. Given that they concede that, they have absolutely zero offense to lie in today's round because they don't win, the North Korea would attack in the first place. But then they tell you that empirically we haven't seen negotiations, but they give you two warrants at the top of their case that tell you that why North Korea now is crumbling, and that changes the game. That's when you look to the Huffington Post evidence, who tells you that for the first time they introduced a formal peace treaty, and the Kalman evidence tells you that this is the first time that they themselves volunteered to give up their nuclear weapons, which is when you vote on the Al Jazeera evidence, which is an independent voter for the negation, who tells you that the reason why those negotiations were halted was because of the launch of THAAD, and they will continue to increase their nuclearization, and that's why we saw a launch of an ICBM. But secondly, they don't answer that THAAD missiles don't actually work. The Hill evidence, ironically, isn't from 2005, it's from 2017, says that they still don't work. But you can also look to the Talmadge evidence, who tells you that any false sense of security is on net worse for South Korean people. But she also concedes the Sioux analysis that their entire impact of 77,000 lives in Seoul, the Sioux evidence tells you that THAAD missiles aren't even designed to protect Seoul. They literally have no offense. But now going on to our case, you're going to be voting voting for us again after the Al Jazeera analysis and the risk of negotiation, but go to Russia real quick, he really mishandles this. He reads the Panda evidence that says that Russia has a perception that they're offensive. Keep in mind, for Russia, perception is reality. We still access those impacts. But then again, he reads the Sinj evidence that tells you that they've had combat drills since 2016. This is when you look to the Pinchuk evidence that tells you that what they didn't have from 2016 was an eroding relationship between Russia and South Korea, and that's the ultimate impact, that South Korea gets their best interests pushed in the region more when they have a better alliance with Russia in the long term. You negate.
Is everyone ready for Crossfire?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things you kept pushing that we dropped was this idea that North Korea is never going to attack South Korea because they fear a U.S. invasion, correct?
Yeah, so that there's a distinction between an increase in missile tests and an actual attack.
So
right?
what Cornelia and I are saying, and what I wanted to ask you about, was the conflicting narrative in the round.
Okay.
How does given the evidence that we've both conceded that Kim Jong-un clearly has a very short time left in power given current circumstances, how do you think is the most rational way for him to act?
Well, I would argue that the way he was acting before, and he was trying to give up nuclear weapons to gain international legitimacy and control his people again,
so
would probably be rational.
That's
right?
the problem, right? Because if Kim Jong-un really wanted to give up his nuclear weapons, he would have given up his nuclear weapons. The problem is
that's when the Al Jazeera evidence that you dropped the entire round says that the reason why those negotiations halted was because of the fact point.
Okay, so there's a really mishandling something that he did in summary. So you
Okay.
never respond back to historical precedents, right? We tell you since 1953 we've had negotiations with North Korea. So let me get to my question. Why all of a sudden, if his leadership is falling away from him, one, and the people are revolting against him, two, would he all of a sudden just give up his nuclear arsenal and take away his leadership, which he prized so heavily?
It's a matter of leverage. The whole argument that Miranda and I are making is that they're using nuclear weapons as a way to gain leverage and a better bargaining position with the West.
But the problem with that argument, Sarah, is that he doesn't care about leverage in the international community.
Well,
What he
does
cares
all-
about,
you-
wait, hold on one
this
second.
is really important
What he
though, because
cares
you guys
about-
keep repeating this without listening to us. We tell you that the only reason why they have stopped right now is because the U.S., backed by South Korea, is now provoking North Korea even
So
more.
I want to clarify one thing, and I would really appreciate if I could just go through this one important piece of analysis given the Al Jazeera evidence. What you keep talking about is how this Al Jazeera evidence is really important because it says North Korea was willing to give up its nukes until it was provoked by THAAD.
Yes.
If North Korea was truly willing to give up its nukes, then THAAD would not have been what stopped it because THAAD is definitionally a defensive weapon.
But
If
what's
North Korea,
convenient-
let me please finish this.
Sure,
If North Korea was a rational actor, then they would not have let a defensive weapon scare them away from the
We
negotiation.
don't have to argue that North Korea is rational, right? But what does your Panda evidence say that you used to respond to our second warrant on Russia? What does Panda find?
All Panda talked about was how Russia opposed the system because
Why?
they thought that it might be used to attack Russia,
Exactly.
which clearly
So
makes no sense.
What it may not make sense to the four of us sitting in a classroom in the USA, but to Russia and North Korea and China in our case, they see that as a legitimate threat.
I don't
so
think
whether
the
or
Russian
not-
ambassador sees
So whether or not
clearly.
you, Kevin, whether or not you personally think that is rational, that is what's occurring.
Yes, but to the point where you guys never respond to our key reason that he wants leadership over anything, that's what you have to be weighing in this room.
At this point, now that we've seen the summaries happen, it's very clear where each side is starting to collapse. Whereas the con is starting to fall and the negotiations falling apart as their key impact, the affirmative is clearly trying to fall on the narrative that they have continued with the entire round being that security is paramount and that Kim Jong-un is willing to attack. So some differences in strategy that you probably just pointed out. So whereas the affirmative spends almost the entirety of their time on offense, the negative spends a disproportionate amount of time on the opponent's case while extending defense before returning to their case. Similarly, differences in style imply differences in the way that they choose to weigh and the placement of the weighing mechanisms that they have in their speech. Whereas one team weighs at the very bottom, the other weighs throughout. Whereas one team weighs on quantifiability, the other weighs on probability. So throughout the final focuses, look at how each team capitalizes on these potential areas of collapse and which team sets up the weighing most effectively for the impacts that they have the strongest offense on.
Remember the overview we have been pushing in today's round. You prefer the direct impacts to the South Korean people, the quantifiable impacts to the South Korean people, over nebulous things like increased tensions or a hope for negotiation. That being said, there are two issues. First, Russia, on their case, their second argument, the panda evidence is important because it tells you the Russian ambassador says the reason he opposes the THAAD system is because it thinks it can be used offensively. They say, oh, that's Russia's perception of the system. That's clearly not Russia's perception of the system. The ambassador of Russia clearly understands how the technology works, but wanted to get involved in the region anyway. He would have used anything for a scapegoat, so this clearly isn't a unique argument. The second argument in the round deals with North Korea and negotiations. We tell you that because North Korea is falling apart, they are less likely to negotiate. They say that makes them more likely to negotiation. How do we reconcile this? With the empirical analysis from CNA that tells you as they have began to fall apart, North Korea empirically becomes more aggressive and belligerent. They try and tell you that means that North Korea is never going to strike though because they fear a US invasion. When we tell you that Kim Jong-un's days are so numbered, all rationality goes out the door. It's not our fault they chose to ignore our narrative. We tell you dictatorships will do anything to project power if they think it's their last hope. That being said, there is a risk that they will end up firing a nuclear weapon at South Korea, which is important because we tell you the THAAD system, in conjunction with other THAAD units and other systems, covers blind spots and creates that 100% effectiveness rate that can shoot down a missile system. All we do is help bolster the current defensive in place and guarantee that it can't kill the South Korean people, taking away 77,000 lives. How do you weigh this against their arguments on negotiation? First is probability. They say that that is what caused the negotiations to fall apart. That was clearly an excuse to stop the negotiations because it is definitionally a defensive weapon. We tell you they've been getting away from negotiations since 1953 and are using them as a way to get back on their feet. Second, it is the only direct impact. Even if you get North Korea to the negotiation table, what gets done? They can't even tell you. We can tell you definitionally you save thousands of lives if you shoot down the bomb.
Everybody ready? Okay. Remember the burden structure that Miranda puts at the top of their case in summary, that they have to prove both that North Korea is a threat and that THAAD curbs that threat. Let's start with the first one. They miss several pieces of evidence that go unresponded to, the first of which is Fiefeld. That tells you that the only reason why North Korea is currently testing their missiles is to gain leverage. They're not doing it to attack. That's really important because if North Korea's missile testing and aggression is designed to get them a better bargaining position, that's not a reason why they're weakening, and that's not a reason why they're a threat. But second on London. London tells you that North Korea is very fearful of an American invasion, so it's very unlikely that they will actually attack. There is a very low probability of North Korea actually attacking South Korea. You can outweigh our evidence because there's a high probability of these impacts already happening. We already see South Korea and North Korea breaking with trade deals. We already see China enacting sanctions. We already see these impacts. Their evidence is all speculative. But lastly on Al Jazeera, that tells you directly that the reason why these diplomatic negotiations have been halted is because of that. Although yes, it is a defensive measure, it's backed by the United States. It's the U.S. presence in the region, and that's causing North Korea to feel as if they're threatened. Even if it's not reality, it's the perception, and that's what matters. But next, let's talk about how THAAD is ineffective. They give you their own analysis on how THAAD can be combined with other units of THAAD to be really effective and to stop the blind spots. Our evidence from 2017 says that North Korea can still easily circumvent these blind spots. It still is very ineffective. But moreover, they miss the offensive turn that I put in rebuttal and Miranda extends in summary. Now, right now, from Talmadge, there's a false sense of security among the South Korean people because when they believe that that is effective, that only stops any sort of security measures being in place. Lastly, on their impacts. They never once give you a quantifiable impact. Even if they tell you that's important, their only quantifiable impact is to Seoul. But what Miranda and I have been telling you this whole round is that that still wouldn't be protecting Seoul, which is where half of South Korea resides. Don't vote there. You can definitely vote on our third vote about North Korea because you're increasing the chance that they'll actually attack, which is directly leading into their own lives' impact. Thus, we urge you to negate.
All right, I'd like to thank our four debaters for what was an excellent round. I would like to thank the Champion Briefs Institute for sponsoring this debate, and I would like to thank you, our viewer, for paying attention. I hope that this is genuinely helpful to you in your preparation for future debate tournaments, especially those in the September-October topic. And with that, hope to see you next year.